The way the Beckhams appear to be pushing so hard for a Harry and Meghan versus the establishment type of feud is honestly one of the most awkward media flops we've seen in a while. The intention is painfully obvious. The UK media keeps trying to manufacture interest, framing it as a dramatic family fallout. But the problem is simple. People just don't care. No matter how many headlines are pushed out or how often it's recycled, the public reaction has been lukewarm at best. What makes it almost funny is how aggressively this narrative is being promoted, yet it keeps collapsing within hours. The stories trend briefly, disappear, and then resurface again with a slightly tweaked angle, only to fall flat once more. That alone tells you this isn't organic. This isn't a story driven by public curiosity. It's a story being fed to the press, and audiences can tell the difference. I wanted to talk about this because for years, literally years, the UK media has had an unhealthy obsession with pitting Meghan against other women. They thrive on these forced rivalries, especially when they can frame it as a mean girl narrative. Meghan is constantly positioned as the problem, the disruptor, the outsider, while other women are quietly elevated as the standard she supposedly fails to meet. Victoria Beckham has frequently been dragged into that conversation, whether directly or indirectly, and the pattern is impossible to ignore. Victoria's proximity to royal adjacent circles tells you a lot. She's closely aligned with people who benefit from maintaining favour with the establishment. And when you look at her behaviour over the years, especially in family dynamics, the similarities to certain royal playbooks start becoming very uncomfortable. Take Meghan's wedding, for example. The media spent years obsessing over bridesmaid dresses, alleged arguments, and behind-the-scenes tension. Kate was painted as the silent victim, despite multiple reports later revealing the situation was far more complicated. That entire episode was weaponized to define Meghan's character. Now, fast forward to Brooklyn Beckham's wedding. Multiple sources close to Nicola Peltz and Brooklyn revealed that Victoria allegedly inserted herself into moments that should have belonged exclusively to the bride and groom. The most glaring example was the first dance, traditionally one of the most intimate moments of a wedding. Instead of allowing Nicola and Brooklyn that space, Victoria reportedly stepped in and took over the moment. That wasn't just awkward, it was deeply inappropriate. And according to insiders, that wasn't an isolated incident. There were several moments throughout the wedding that made guests uncomfortable. Boundaries were crossed. Attention was redirected. And eventually, Brooklyn seemed to realize that this dynamic was not something he wanted to carry into his married life. At some point, he chose himself. He chose his wife. He chose his new family. And that's where the real problem began. Instead of respecting that decision, the response was to go straight to the press. Suddenly, articles appeared framing Brooklyn as distant, ungrateful, or difficult. The same people who publicly condemned bullying conveniently looked the other way, while the UK media went after their own son. It's the hypocrisy that really stands out. What's even more striking is how many people online immediately recognized the parallel. A lot of commenters said Brooklyn has Harry energy, that same refusal to tolerate toxic behavior. That same willingness to walk away, even when it means challenging powerful families with deep media connections. That same clarity that peace is worth more than proximity to power. Someone on X said it best. The Beckhams wanted a Harry and Meghan moment so badly. They thought this feud would dominate headlines, spark endless debate, and keep their names in constant circulation. They believed they could replicate the Sussex media cycle and possibly even outshine it. Instead, the public shrugged. The media tried everything. Stories were sold, headlines were softened, then sharpened. Other children were subtly encouraged to speak out. And yet, David and Victoria maintained plausible deniability, pretending they had no involvement while benefiting from the coverage. But people aren't stupid. The playbook is familiar. What's refreshing, though, is how much the public response has changed. Instead of immediately attacking Brooklyn, people are now saying, "We don't know the full story." They're questioning the narrative. They're pointing out that distancing yourself from family doesn't automatically make you the villain. For all we know, the environment was toxic, controlling, or emotionally exhausting. And honestly, after watching what Harry has endured, you can't blame anyone for choosing distance over destruction. The Beckhams have spent decades chasing approval from the British establishment. David's knighthood didn't happen by accident. It was the result of relentless positioning, alignment and silence when it mattered most. And that kind of proximity always comes with a cost. One of those costs is complicity, especially when the press turns its attention towards someone you're supposed to protect. Their comfort with media attacks on Meghan tells you exactly what they're capable of. If they could watch that happen and say nothing, it's not surprising they'd allow similar tactics to be used against their own child. Then there's the fashion narrative, which is almost insulting to audience intelligence. UK outlets constantly push the idea that Meghan is copying Victoria Beckham's style. Meanwhile, Victoria's brand has struggled for years. Despite endless PR, celebrity endorsements and royal visibility, it continues to hemorrhage relevance. Kate's involvement hasn't helped either. History shows that when Kate is repeatedly photographed wearing a brand, it doesn't guarantee success, it often precedes decline. The stiff silhouettes, outdated tailoring, and repetitive colour palettes don't inspire aspiration. No one looks at those olive green suits or boxy dresses and rushes to recreate the look. Yet the media insists on framing it as fashion dominance, ignoring the reality that consumer interest simply isn't there. Coming back to the so-called feud, this storyline was meant to be massive. The ex-footballer's family clearly believed it would dominate the news cycle the way Sussex stories do. Instead, it barely lasted a day. People joked about a potential reality show because the desperation was that obvious. We saw headlines screaming about Instagram chaos and family drama going public. TMZ joined in. Other outlets followed, and yet we're expected to believe David and Victoria had nothing to do with it? That they didn't encourage statements, reactions, or selective silence? It's the same strategy we've seen before: sell out one family member to protect the brand. But here's where it all fell apart. Nicola Peltz's father is a billionaire. He's not going to allow his daughter to be dragged through the mud for someone else's PR agenda. Any attempt to smear her gets shut down immediately. There's money, power, and legal backing behind that protection, and it shows. Unlike others who exploit their children for headlines, he draws a hard line. That's why these stories keep collapsing. That's why the narrative never sticks. You can't bully someone who has the resources to fight back. Online, the response has shifted from curiosity to mockery. People are openly calling out the desperation, the hypocrisy, the silence in the face of bullying. The eerie similarities between the Beckhams and the royal family when it comes to media manipulation. At the end of the day, this wasn't the feud they hoped for. It wasn't the spectacle they imagined. The public isn't buying it. The narrative won't hold, and the comparison to Harry and Meghan only highlights the difference between authentic stories and manufactured drama. That's why this whole thing keeps failing. And that's why it will continue to fail. Let me know what you think about this in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.